The wind howled through the shattered remnants of a small French village, carrying with it the bitter scent of smoke, gunpowder, and the quiet ghosts of battles already lost. The buildings, once homes filled with laughter and warm bread, were now hollowed-out shells, walls torn open by artillery, rooftops collapsed like broken wings. Private Jonathan Hayes moved cautiously through a narrow alleyway, his boots crunching over debris, glass, wood, stone, and occasionally, something darker. His rifle was raised, finger near the trigger. He had learned long ago never to relax, even in silence. Especially in silence. It was November 1944, and the 101st Airborne Division had been advancing for weeks through northern France. Every day brought another ruined town, another skirmish with desperate German soldiers clinging to what little ground they had left. But that didn't make them less dangerous. The more ground the Allies gained, the more fierce the resistance became. Jonathan paused beside the crumbling remains of a stone wall, half collapsed under a shell blast. He pressed his back against it and took a long, slow breath. The air was cold and heavy, thick with dust and the unmistakable tang of burning metal. Somewhere in the distance, the low rumble of artillery echoed like distant thunder, steady and unrelenting. His eyes scanned the alley, empty for now. But he didn't trust it. Slowly, with practiced hands, he reached inside his jacket, beneath the layers of dirt, sweat, and fatigue that clung to him like a second skin. From the inner pocket, he pulled out a small, worn envelope. The edges were frayed, the paper stained by time, weather, and perhaps a drop of blood. The ink had faded in places, but the words were still clear. "Dear Emma," it began, the familiar handwriting stirring something deep inside him. He had written the letter months ago, during a rare moment of quiet when the sun had broken through the gray and the fighting had lulled. He'd meant to send it, but he never got the chance. Missions changed, men were lost, and soon they were on the move again, chasing retreating German forces deeper into the countryside.
Emma.
Even thinking her name softened the edges of the war around him. Her face came to him in flashes, sunlit hair, the curve of her smile, the way she laughed when he teased her about her terrible cooking. Back home in Iowa, she had been his anchor, the person who made the world feel real before it all fell apart. He could picture her now, standing on the porch of her family's farmhouse, the fields golden behind her. She had cried the day he left, though she tried not to show it. He remembered brushing his thumb across her cheek, promising her he'd write every day and that he'd come back. So far, he had kept only one of those promises. Jonathan sighed and ran a gloved hand over his face, feeling the stubble, the grime, the exhaustion etched into his skin. He looked at the letter again. His words felt distant now, like they belonged to a younger, more hopeful version of himself. One who hadn't yet seen what war could do to men. One who hadn't watched friends die in fields they couldn't name, far from home. But still, the letter was here, still folded in his pocket. A fragment of another life. He read it silently. "Dear Emma, if I could bottle the sunlight that falls through the trees here, I'd send it to you. The mornings are cold and the nights colder, but I think of your warmth and it keeps me going. I don't know what's ahead, but I want you to know I'm doing everything I can to get back to you. Love always, Jonathan." He hadn't been able to finish it. He remembered being interrupted, gunfire in the distance, orders shouted down the line, boots scrambling through mud. By the time he'd had the chance to write again, everything had changed. Now here he was, standing in another broken village, unsure if he would ever make it out. He carefully folded the letter and placed it back inside his jacket. Not for the first time, he wondered what he would do if he didn't get the chance to see her again. Would someone find the letter and deliver it? Would she know how much she meant to him? Would she wait? A sudden noise pulled him back to the present, a soft rustle behind a collapsed barn. His training took over instantly. Rifle raised, breath held, he moved silently toward the sound, heart pounding not just with fear, but with the unspoken need to survive. To return. To finish what he had started, not just the mission but the promise. Behind him, the wind continued to howl. Before the war, Jonathan Hayes had never set foot outside of Iowa. His entire world existed within the borders of his family's modest farm. Fields of golden wheat that stretched to the horizon, the soft hum of cicadas in the summer, and the rhythm of life that revolved around planting, harvesting, and home-cooked meals by lamplight. He lived there with his parents and his younger sister, Ruth, a spirited girl with quick wit and an even quicker temper. They were a close-knit family. Every morning, Jonathan rose with the sun, helping his father in the fields, fixing fences, tending to livestock, and mending equipment in the barn. It was a hard life, but it was honest and peaceful. And then there was Emma. Emma lived on the neighboring farm, just across the gravel road. Their families had been friends for generations, and the two had grown up together, climbing trees, fishing in the creek, and racing barefoot down dirt paths between rows of corn. As children, they had shared secrets and silly dreams. As teenagers, their friendship had quietly evolved into something deeper, something unspoken but unmistakable. By the time Jonathan was 20, everyone in the county knew they were meant for each other. Then, in December of 1941, everything changed. The news came crackling over the radio like a nightmare. Pearl Harbor had been attacked. Jonathan remembered the look on his father's face as he turned the volume up, the announcer's voice grave and distant, reporting explosions, casualties, and a nation shocked into war. The room had fallen silent. No one even stirred their coffee. Within days, young men across the country were lining up to enlist. The war had come to their doorstep, and Jonathan knew he couldn't just sit back and watch. That night, as a thin layer of frost began to cover the fields, Jonathan made his way to Emma's house. The moon hung low in the sky, casting silver light over the familiar landscape. He found her standing on the porch, arms wrapped around herself against the cold, as if she had been waiting for him. She didn't say anything at first. She didn't have to. The way she looked at him told him she already knew. "I have to go," Jonathan said quietly, his breath visible in the air. Emma's face paled. She looked away for a moment, blinking quickly. "I figured you would," she whispered, her voice tight with emotion. He stepped closer. "They need us, Emma. I can't stay here, not while others are out there fighting. I have to do my part." She nodded, but her chin trembled. "I understand," she said, though her voice cracked on the last word. There was a long pause. The world felt suspended around them, the barn lights glowing dimly in the distance, the wind brushing gently through bare branches, the cold pressing in on all sides. Emma looked up at him, eyes shining. "Just promise me something." Jonathan reached out and took her hand, squeezing it gently. "Anything." "Promise you'll write," she said, her voice steadier now. "Every day. Even if you can't send them right away. Just write. I want to know how you're doing, what you're seeing, what you're feeling." He smiled, though his heart ached. "Only if you promise to wait." Tears spilled over her lashes. "I will," she whispered, "for as long as it takes." He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly. She buried her face in his chest, and for a long time, neither of them said anything. The world was changing all around them, but in that moment, all that existed was the two of them, two young souls caught in the tide of history, trying desperately to hold on to something real. Later that night, Jonathan lay awake in his bed, staring at the wooden ceiling above him. His bag was already packed. His enlistment papers were signed. Tomorrow, he would leave behind the only life he'd ever known. But in his mind, he wasn't thinking about war or glory or duty. He was thinking about Emma, her warmth, her strength, her promise. He would write to her every day. And he would come home. He had to. Training camp in Georgia was nothing like home. It was grueling, relentless, and stripped the softness from every man who walked through its gates. Jonathan Hayes had been used to early mornings on the farm, but this was something else entirely. Mud-caked boots, blister hands, shouting sergeants, and sleep so short it felt like dreaming with your eyes open. The days bled together in a blur of drills, obstacle courses, and endless marching. Every muscle in Jonathan's body screamed during those first few weeks, and by the end of the second month, he barely recognized himself when he looked in the mirror. The boy from Iowa, suntanned and easy smiling, had become something harder, leaner, forged like iron under pressure. He had muscles now where there had been none, calloused hands, and fresh scars that told quiet stories of trials endured. But it wasn't just his body that changed. The way he saw the world began to shift too. Innocence gave way to realism. Simplicity was replaced by complexity. Instructors drilled them not just in tactics and physical endurance, but in the mindset of war. Kill or be killed, act without hesitation, trust your training. Still, amid all that intensity and noise, Jonathan clung to one quiet ritual that kept him grounded, his nightly letters to Emma. Each evening, after the final roll call, and when the barracks had gone dim except for a few flickering lanterns, Jonathan would find a quiet moment to sit on his bunk, pull out a pencil and paper, and begin to write. "Dear Emma," he wrote, nearly every night. The words were simple, sometimes hurried, but always heartfelt. "Today I learned how to jump out of a plane," he scribbled one evening, his hand still trembling from the adrenaline. "I nearly broke my leg on the landing. Sergeant says I hit the ground like a sack of potatoes. You'd have laughed." He wrote about the food, terrible. The drills, endless. The men, tough, but slowly becoming brothers. But mostly he wrote about her. Her laughter, her letters, the way she used to brush her hair back with one hand when she was thinking. He poured everything into those letters because he didn't want to lose touch with who he was, and who he was hers. Emma wrote back just as faithfully. Her handwriting had always been neat and full of loops, and seeing her familiar scrawl on the envelope made his heart beat faster every time. Her letters smelled faintly of lavender and home. Inside, she wrote about life on the farm, about Ruth taking on more chores, the weather, the crops, the way the cat refused to sleep anywhere but his empty bed. "The farm's not the same without you," she wrote in one. "Ruth helps with the milking now. She grumbles about it, but I think she secretly enjoys being useful. I miss you most in the evenings, when the sun is setting and the whole world turns gold. That's when I picture you walking back through the fields toward me." Sometimes her letters made him laugh. Sometimes they made him cry. But they always made him feel whole again. He kept every single one, folded carefully and tucked inside the small wooden box he kept under his cot. During long marches or moments of doubt, he'd slip one out and read it again. The paper had grown soft at the creases, and the ink had smudged in places, sometimes from sweat, sometimes from tears. But the words never lost their power. Even under fire, during live drills, when his ears rang from the sound of explosions and his body moved purely on instinct, her letters were in his chest pocket, close to his heart. They were more than words. They were a lifeline. Jonathan Hayes would remember the sound of the engines forever. The low drone of C-47 transport planes slicing through the night sky over Normandy. He sat huddled with the rest of his platoon, heart pounding, parachute straps tight across his chest, his fingers clenched around his rifle. No one spoke. They didn't have to. Fear hung in the air like fog. Then came the signal. The red light turned green. Go, go, go. Jonathan leapt into the blackness. The sky exploded around him, tracer fire arcing like fiery ropes, anti-aircraft bursts shaking the very air, and men yelling over the roar of war. His parachute jerked open violently. For a split second, he was weightless, floating among chaos, then crashing through the wind into the unknown below. He hit the ground hard, a bone-jarring impact that knocked the breath from his lungs. The darkness was thick, the field unfamiliar, and he realized almost immediately that he was far off course. The rest of his unit had landed miles away. He was alone, deep in enemy territory. For 2 long days, Jonathan moved through hedgerows and burned-out farmsteads, avoiding German patrols and sniper fire. He barely slept, ate what rations he had, and kept his weapon close, his ears tuned to every rustle in the grass. More than once, he saw shadows move where they shouldn't. Once he heard a scream in the distance, a fellow paratrooper, maybe. Or worse. He didn't investigate. By the time he finally linked up with his unit near St. Miraglise, he was filthy, bloodied, and hollow-eyed. The relief of seeing familiar faces was short-lived. There were fewer of them than before. Many hadn't made it. Some were missing. Some confirmed dead. Jonathan didn't ask who. He was afraid of the answers. What followed were days of relentless combat. The towns of Normandy were not taken easily. The Germans fought tooth and nail, their machine guns raking through stone streets, their tanks lurking behind hedgerows. Jonathan saw men blown apart, heard the last gasps of friends as medics shouted for help that came too late. The war was not glorious. It was filthy, loud, and cruel. It was nothing like the movies. There was no stirring music, no heroic speeches. Only the wet slap of boots in bloodied mud, the metallic taste of fear, and the smell of gunpowder that clung to his skin like a second layer. Then came the worst moment of all. Corporal Reyes, Jonathan's closest friend in the unit, was hit during an early morning push toward a farmhouse outside Corentin. A mortar shell landed just feet away, the explosion lifting Reyes off his feet and sending Jonathan sprawling. When he scrambled over to him, Reyes was barely conscious, his chest torn open, his breathing shallow and wet. Jonathan pressed his hands down to stop the bleeding, but there was too much blood. "Stay with me," he whispered, trying to ignore the chaos erupting around them. "Come on, Reyes, stay with me." Reyes opened his eyes for just a moment. He tried to smile. "It's okay, Hayes," he rasped, blood at the corners of his mouth. "Tell my mom. I wasn't scared." Then he was gone. Jonathan sat there, frozen, until someone pulled him away. The rest of the day passed in a haze of gunfire and smoke. He couldn't write that night, or the night after. For nearly a week, the notebook and pencil stayed buried at the bottom of his pack. Every evening, he would take out the photo of Emma, her soft smile, the summer dress she wore the day before he left, and stare at it like it might speak to him. But the words wouldn't come. How do you write about something like that? How could he describe to her the sound of a man dying, the sudden silence that follows, the way it empties a part of you didn't know could be hollowed out? But Emma had asked him to write. She had begged him to. And he had promised. So, on the 7th night, under a shattered roof with rain dripping through the cracks, Jonathan lit a stub of a candle and began to write again, hand shaking as he put pencil to paper. "Dear Emma, I saw something today no man should ever see. I want to tell you everything, but I can't. I don't want you to carry these images, this pain. Just know that I'm still holding on. I'm still breathing. Because I promised you I would. And that promise is what keeps me going when everything else feels like it's falling apart." He paused, then added quietly, "Tell Ruth I miss her jokes. Tell your mother the bread she sent lasted 2 days. Tell yourself, I'm coming home." He folded the letter carefully, tucked it beside Emma's photo, and leaned back against the cold wall. Outside, the wind howled across the broken village, but inside, he felt just a little less alone. By September of 1944, after months of intense fighting across the battered countryside of France, Jonathan Hayes and what remained of his platoon were assigned a different kind of mission, to assist and operate alongside the French resistance. It was a world unlike the front lines he had known before, less uniformed, less predictable, but equally dangerous. The resistance didn't wear helmets or carry rank. Their battlefield was the shadows. Railroads were sabotaged under moonlight. German supply lines vanished in flames. Enemy convoys were ambushed with hit-and-run precision, disappearing back into the hills before the smoke cleared. Every mission came with high risk, but the courage of the French fighters was undeniable. That's when Jonathan met Claire. She wasn't like anyone he'd ever known. Claire was bold, sharp, and fearless to a fault. She wore her auburn hair tucked under a cap, and her eyes, deep, searching, always watchful, seemed to cut through lies and fear alike. She had a calmness about her even in the heat of danger, a quiet fury that never boiled over, but never left her either. Jonathan learned her story in pieces, spoken not by her, but by others, in hushed tones around fires and inside candlelit basements. Her father, a schoolteacher, had been executed by the Gestapo for hiding a Jewish family in their home. She never spoke of it. She didn't have to. Her rage lived in her actions. Claire knew the forests, the old trails, and the shifting patrol patterns like they were etched into her bones. She carried a pistol hidden in the folds of her coat and a tattered map in her satchel, worn soft from use. She guided American soldiers through narrow passes, timed explosives on enemy trains, and translated intercepted orders with a fluency that saved lives. To Jonathan, Claire was more than just a fighter. She was a symbol of what they were all risking their lives for. She reminded him of what freedom looked like when it was taken, of what courage looked like when it grew from pain. But Claire also stirred something else in him, a conflict he hadn't expected, something deeper, more personal. Late one night, after a particularly daring raid on a German radio post, their small group had gathered around a fire in the ruins of an abandoned farmhouse. The adrenaline of the mission still pulsed in their veins, but there was laughter now, even if it was hollow, relief, for the moment, that they had survived another day. Jonathan sat apart from the others, staring into the flames, lost in thought. In his hand, he held a worn photograph, Emma, smiling in the Iowa sun. Claire approached without a sound. She sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, but she didn't speak right away. The fire flickered in her eyes. After a moment, she reached out and gently touched his hand. Her fingers were rough from work and war, but the touch was warm, comforting. "You miss someone back home," she said quietly, her accent softening the words. Jonathan didn't look at her. He nodded slowly.
Emma.
There was silence between them, but not the uncomfortable kind. It was a silence of understanding, of two people who had lost too much, seen too much, and still found the strength to hold on to hope. Claire gave a sad, knowing smile. "Then live," she whispered, her eyes never leaving the fire. "So you can go back to her." He finally looked at her, surprised not just by her kindness, but by the clarity of it. She didn't resent Emma. She didn't wish him to forget. She wanted him to survive. That was all any of them wanted. Jonathan squeezed her hand gently, a silent thank you. No more words were spoken between them that night. The fire crackled softly as the others drifted to sleep, and Jonathan sat awake for a while longer, staring at the photo of Emma. For the first time in weeks, the guilt in his heart lessened, not because the war was easier or because he was stronger, but because someone else had reminded him that it was okay to feel what he felt. And that survival was not just a mission. It was a promise. The forest was a place of misery. Cold rain, endless mud, and trees shattered by artillery surrounded Jonathan like a dark, suffocating cage. The Germans were entrenched and desperate, and the fighting had turned into a slow, brutal grind. Every inch of ground came at the cost of blood. It was during one of those relentless assaults that Jonathan was hit. The explosion came without warning, just a sharp, concussive roar followed by pain. Shrapnel tore into his side, hot and unforgiving. He hit the ground hard, gasping, clutching his wound as the world around him blurred. He was lucky if being pulled off the front lines with torn flesh and a high fever counted as luck. Medics stabilized him, and after a few days, he was sent away from the front for light duty. He found himself reassigned to guard duty in a battered French village, now under Allied control, a place half reduced to rubble and silence. For the first time in months, he had time. Time to breathe, time to feel, and time to think. The pain from the injury was dull now, bandaged and treated, but the emotional weight was heavier than ever. He had seen things no man should see. Friends dead, civilians caught in the crossfire, towns turned to ash. And through it all, one name had never left his thoughts: Emma. He found a half-empty notebook in the village church's abandoned rectory and sat in a corner one cold morning, the broken stained glass casting pale colors over the stone floor. He pulled out the pencil he always kept tucked in his jacket and began to write, slowly and deliberately. This letter felt different. It felt final. "Dear Emma," he wrote, "if you're reading this, it means I may not have made it home." The words came like a release, a flood of emotion that had long been held back behind grit and duty. He paused, staring at the page, then continued. I need you to know that you were my light in all this darkness. Every step I took thinking of you. Every bullet I dodged, I did for you. I've seen many things here, some beautiful, like the sunrise over a liberated town. But mostly, I've seen horror. I've seen men cry for their mothers. I've seen courage. I've seen fear. But through it all, Emma, I held on to you. He paused again, the pencil shaking slightly in his hand. You once asked me what I feared most. It's not dying. It's not pain. I've seen both up close now. What I fear most is the thought of you waiting for me forever. Alone. That's the one thing I can't bear. If I don't come back, Emma, please don't let your life stop for me. Please don't spend your days in sorrow. He swallowed hard, his throat tightening. Live. Laugh. Love someone new if you must. Be happy. That's all I ever wanted for you. He signed it simply, deliberately. I love you, Jonathan. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully, placed it inside his jacket next to her photo, and leaned back against the cold stone wall. The silence of the village pressed in around him, broken only by the distant rumble of artillery. He didn't know what the next days would bring. He had seen too much to believe in promises. But writing that letter made him feel something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. That night, under the cold silver light of the moon, the quiet was shattered. Without warning, German troops launched a surprise attack on the village. Gunfire erupted from the shadows, echoing off stone walls. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkened alleyways as chaos consumed the broken streets. Jonathan reacted instinctively. Grabbing his rifle, he joined the few remaining men from his unit and took up position behind a crumbling wall. Bullets whistled through the air, striking stone and splintering wood. The firefight was brutal and relentless. For every enemy they took down, another seemed to appear from the mist. In the middle of the battle, Jonathan saw a fellow soldier, just a kid, maybe 18, hit and crying out in pain, stranded in the open. Without thinking, Jonathan broke cover and ran to him, bullets kicking up dirt around his boots. He reached the soldier and began dragging him back toward safety. That's when the shot hit him. A sharp, burning pain tore through his side, and he collapsed, shielding the young man with his own body. The ground was freezing, and as blood soaked through his uniform, his strength began to fade. His vision blurred, but his hand instinctively reached inside his jacket. He clutched the letter to Emma. The one he had written days earlier, the one he had never sent. When reinforcements finally arrived hours later, they found him barely alive, unconscious and pale, lying beside the wounded soldier he'd tried to save. The letter was still in his hand, its paper stained with blood but the words untouched, a final message of love, courage, and hope. Jonathan spent the next 3 months in a military hospital in southern England. His wounds were severe, shrapnel damage, internal bleeding, a fractured rib. Doctors told him more than once that he was lucky to be alive. Some days, he wasn't so sure. The hospital was full of men like him, broken bodies, distant eyes, and stories they didn't know how to tell. Nurses smiled gently, the Red Cross brought books, but nothing filled the quiet like the memory of war. When he was finally strong enough to walk without collapsing, he was put on a transport ship bound for the United States. By then, the war in Europe had ended. Germany had surrendered. The streets of London were filled with celebration, flags waving, confetti falling, music in the air. But Jonathan didn't feel like cheering. There was only silence inside him. Back home, victory parades rolled through city streets. Strangers embraced in public squares. But Jonathan wasn't thinking of medals or speeches. He was thinking of one person, Emma. And one letter, stained with blood, never meant to be read unless he didn't make it home. When the train finally pulled into the small station in Iowa, Jonathan stepped down slowly, his limp still heavy, a cane in his hand. The landscape was as he remembered it, wide open skies, golden fields, the smell of earth and corn, but it all felt foreign now. He didn't know what to expect. Had she read the letter? Had she moved on? He walked the familiar dirt road to the farm, heart pounding with each step. His legs ached, but he pushed forward until the house came into view. And then he saw her. Emma, sitting on the porch, hands folded in her lap. As soon as she spotted him, she rose to her feet, eyes wide. She didn't wait. She ran to him, tears streaming down her cheeks. She reached him and threw her arms around his neck. "You're late," she said through sobs. Jonathan's voice broke. "I almost didn't make it. I got your letter." "I'm so sore." She silenced him with a kiss. "I waited," she whispered. And in that moment, the war inside him finally quieted. Jonathan and Emma married that autumn, returning to the quiet life of farming. Though the war was behind him, its memories never faded. Every November 11th, he placed a single white rose on Corporal Reyes's grave, honoring the friend he lost. He taught his children that peace was a precious gift, paid for with sacrifice and courage. In his study, behind glass, hung the last letter he had written during the war, a letter never sent but forever cherished. It was a reminder of love, loss, and the cost of freedom.